What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Sheehan Show here on Sherdog.com. My name is Sean Sheehan, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by an all-rounder in mixed martial arts, a fighter, a presenter, and a proud new owner of a Fiat Jolly, Laura Sanko. Laura, how are you today?
I'm well, thank you. Yes, as a European, you can appreciate it. A lot of the Americans saw that on my Instagram and they're like, "What on earth is that?"
The Fiat. So you know what Fiat stands for here? FIAT, fix it again tomorrow. So I think you'll have a good time with your Fiat over next.
That is really funny that you say that, because as we are talking right now, my husband is outside fixing the starter.
What year is it? That's an old car, is it?
It's a 65, I think, 1965. Yeah.
It's really cool, and you just
But
have
how
a kind
cute
of.
is it? It's so
cool,
cute.
yeah. I don't think I've ever seen one of those before. Like, maybe on like Top Gear or something like that a long time ago. But are you just driving around the farm, or are you bringing it out in the roads, or what are you going to do?
It doesn't do well, off-roading, but we live in a neighborhood where there's a golf course. So there's a lot of it's acceptable to drive a golf cart around on the streets here. And I can get to like the local coffee shop, the local liquor store, and one restaurant without having to go like on the highway or a truly major road. So yeah, we're just gonna tootle around. We're building a new house, and the driveway in the new house is a third of a mile long. So part of it was, I told my husband, I was like, I have to have something cute to get the mail in.
Yeah.
But it's incredibly impractical because that's only going to work 8 months of the year. I don't know what I'm going to do in snow. I don't know.
Put snow tires on it or something. Yeah. It'll be fine. But it's nice to have something like that, isn't it? I love like those old time kind of cars, and it's the new cars are all well and good, but you can't beat the beauty of one of those old cars. Have you always liked those kind of old cars?
I haven't always been an old car kind of gal, but I'm becoming more so and appreciating it more. My husband and my son are really, really, really into cars, and working on them, and fixating upon what they want to buy next, of course, is obviously the biggest thing. But yeah, I'm kind of learning to appreciate the classics a bit. But that one, I have to be honest, it was just pure aesthetics. I just thought it was the cutest thing I'd ever seen. And then my husband explained to me kind of the history behind them, and apparently it was like really popular obviously Fiats are incredibly common in Europe, way, way, way less common here. But the Jolly in particular was designed as like a small enough, cute car that could go on a yacht. So like Aristotle Onassis had one, and Grace Kelly had one, and they were meant to be able to drive on and off your yacht and just tootle around the beach. So I don't have a yacht, but I have a Jolly.
The yacht is the next thing to come now. Tell him that's the next birthday. Christmas
as an accessory to my Jolly, I need a yacht.
Yeah. We might get onto Conor McGregor and ask him to pull the pull the yacht up and get it on. Right, I suppose we better talk a little bit about MMA here. UFC 308 at the weekend, and obviously just to kind of recap that here over the next few minutes. To me, it was one of the cards of the year. I think sometimes cards on paper don't exactly pan out, and when they're so good, you maybe build them up too much. And sometimes the cards that aren't as good on paper turn out to be amazing, and everyone's talking about them. But this was brilliant on paper and brilliant in practice as well. Obviously, sitting, I believe you're home watching this, sitting there watching the top 2 or 3 fights, especially. How excited did you get? Because I see, I know the way I reacted to people who are watching or here with me, but the fighters doing a lot of reaction videos and stuff like that. How were you reacting at home to the madness that ensued on Saturday?
Well, first of all, it was nice to have them earlier in the day, because I will admit to you and very few other people that more often than I would like to tell you, when it gets time for that main event, I have a really hard time staying awake.
Try being me.
Times where I go to bed, I don't look at my phone, I don't check anything, and the first thing I do when I wake up is watch the main event. So it was nice to not have that situation, to be fully awake for all the madness that ensued. And yeah, it was a roller coaster of emotion for the entire night of that card. I thought it was a tremendous card. It's up. We've had a good year though. We've had an embarrassment of riches, as John Anik would say. UFC 300, UFC 303. Hard to compete with those, but this has to be up there. Definitely top 5.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about it because the award season is kind of coming around, and there's usually one that sticks out. There's usually one amazing one, but like the ones you mentioned are the Sphere. The Sphere should almost win it without even the fights being mentioned, because it was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. But yeah, I said I like, we'll talk about Topuria in a minute, but the fighter of the year argument is going to be massive now as well.
It is.
I want to touch on Max Holloway first though, because you're probably as well placed as anyone to talk about this, because I had a theory coming in. Like, I look at Ilia Topuria, right, and I just think he's one of the greatest fighters, honestly, we've ever seen, which is a weird thing to say because he's so young in his career. And I picked him coming in to win because I didn't even really think about it. I just think he's that good. And I saw a lot of people picking Max Holloway. And I was doing like the post-fight podcast over in Severe May, talking about it with my colleague Graham, and I was just like, I think what I missed was the amount of love actually people have for Max Holloway. And everyone has always loved Max Holloway, but I feel since the Gaethje fight, he's gone from like a fighter you like, a fighter you always want to see, to a McGregor, a Diaz, a GSP, and Anderson Silva. Have you, as someone who's there obviously on the ground in all of his, a lot of his fights over the last few years, is that something you have felt, that Max Holloway has actually gone to the next level? He's not just a star anymore. He's now a superstar and a fan favorite.
I think that's fair to say. There's this certain classification of fighter that, I don't know, you have to be a certain way and do certain things to be invited into that group. Dustin Poirier's in that group. Max Holloway's in that group. You could argue that Cowboy's in that group. There's a certain type of fighter that gets to sit at that particular lunch table. And he's been at that lunch table for a while. But I agree with you that these finishes, these clinics that he has put on recently did elevate him even more so. Because I think quite often the guys at that lunch table, you appreciate the body of work over a long period of time, and that's kind of where they live in your brain, right? And we don't always necessarily have the greatest of expectations for them pulling out new tricks out of the hat, or finding a new gear at this stage in their career. We just appreciate them for who they are, and that's enough. So when they surprise us and they do pull out new tricks and a new gear, and start putting guys away and doing things, I mean, that has to be up there as one of the greatest finishes. Of course, I'm talking about the Gaethje knockout. That's got to be top 5 finishes all time ever, period, in the history of the UFC. So to do something like that after we already love him and appreciate him so much, yeah, it's only going to elevate his stardom. And I think he's up there in terms of being a true superstar.
And I love that, because it adds another element to mixed martial arts that we don't always see. Because, even guys who fight a lot, they fight 3 times a year, maybe 4 times a year. And it's not like our local sports team who, we're watching every week. We're watching 20 times a year, maybe 40 times a year. If it's a baseball team, like 300 times a year, or whatever it is, that we have that deep affinity for them. It's not, MMA is not really like that. But when you add in, Conor is a great example, but I think Frankie Edgar is another example. And I like, every time Man United play, I don't have logic to 100% of my brain as I would if I'm watching, let's say, this fight, or like Shara Bullet versus Petrosian, or something like that. I'm just watching it. There's no emotion for it. And MMA is like that a lot of the time. But with Max now, I don't think it is anymore. I really don't. And that might seem like a negative, but I actually think it's a positive, because that level of fandom is it's something that's fantastic. And what's that going to do? That's going to, make him richer and sell a lot more pay-per-views and everything like that. Have you noticed that with other people, and seen, I know people turn up like to the Fighter Hotel and, wanting autographs and everything like that. Is that something that you've noticed since the pandemic, even, that more people have become that maybe star in that time?
Yes. Yeah. I think the type of fandom has increased. Which is wild to say, because it's not like we were lacking before that, but something happened during those couple of years where people were stuck inside and maybe introduced to the UFC for the first time. I can't rattle off the stats the way that Dana can, but I know that the numbers in terms of fan base, views, interaction, by all of the metrics that you can imagine all went up, and like not just up a little bit but significantly up. And yeah, you feel it when you're at a fight week and you walk into the lobby of a hotel after a big pay-per-view weekend. It can be mayhem. It's funny because some hotels in some cities are very, like shut it down, keep it under lock and key. And then some cities, it's like, well, we'll just let anyone in it, and it can be pretty chaotic in some of those places, but in a fun way because it's cool to see people meet their heroes.
Uh,
That's the best thing about this sport
it's
is
brilliant.
seeing that passion from the fan base.
I remember the last time the UFC was here in Ireland, and Dustin Poirier was supposed to fight Joe Duffy in the main event, and the fight fell out.
Yeah,
So Dustin stayed around and literally was just like drinking beer with everyone in the hotel
yeah.
for the week. So yeah, that's if you come around to the UFC, you will get that. Here's the question: how good is Ilia Topuria? Because I feel
Uh,
like some fighters, Demetrius Johnson, even John Jones to an extent, Volkanovski, it's hard for myself or people tuning in to actually understand how good they are. As someone who obviously trains a lot, who's fought yourself, can you explain to us just how good Ilia Topuria is?
he's so good that he becomes difficult to analyze, which is really fun and a big challenge when your job is to present possibilities of fight outcomes, or if this happens, this is probably going to happen. Or, you want to paint pictures, you want to paint scenarios for the audience to get on board with. It's really hard to do with him because he is so complete. And that dreaded phrase, well-rounded, is just not the sexiest thing to say about somebody. But the
No.
fact is that is exactly what he is. But he's not just well-rounded. He is dangerous in every respect. It's one thing to be capable and a good at everything at the same time. It's another thing to be dangerous everywhere. And the same can be said. I used to say these very same things, and still would say these. I don't mean to say it in the past tense. I would say these same things about Alex Volkanovski, but now we have Alex Volkanovski with a insane amount of power. That was the only thing that Alex never really showed us a ton of, was crushing one punch type of knockout power. He's slick, management skills, obviously didn't rely on his grappling too much. We knew he was a good grappler. Well-rounded. Ilya is like another level beyond that. And that's crazy to say because Alex Volkanovski is one of the best featherweight champions this sport has ever seen. But for Ilya to knock out Alex and then to take out Max in
Crazy.
in in concurrent fights, that's insane. That is insane.
What really put me over the edge on Topuria was, so I think Demetrius Johnson is the greatest fighter of all time. I just adore everything he does, his skill level. And for
Yeah.
the first time ever, I spoke about Volkanovski as someone who's getting close to him. Like, I have that much respect for Volkanovski. But
Yeah.
when that fight was coming up, I picked Topuria to knock him out. I'm like, that's crazy to even think about that. And then obviously he did knock him out. And then he came in and he knocked out Holloway. Like, Luke Thomas put up a thing, has there ever been a 2 fight stretch where someone has beaten two better guys in a row? It's we could go back through the annals of history and maybe find one, but God Almighty, it's hard to think of someone who's beaten two guys as good as that in a row and demolished them, like knocked them both out in the space of what 4 or 5 rounds. It's crazy what he's done, isn't
Yeah.
it?
In the manner in which he did it, where it was not. I mean, here's one thing. There are times where someone will win in spectacular fashion and we can appreciate it and we can stick it on their highlight reel and we can all talk about it. But in the back of our heads, there's kind of like, but was it a lucky shot? Did
Yeah.
he run into it? You don't have that sense whatsoever when you're talking about the finishes that Ilya Topuria. He is setting them up. He's finding them. He's predatory in that way. And watching him operate, not that he's perfect. Max had great moments in that fight. It wasn't like it was a dominant one-sided, mollywhopping at all. But the whole time, even when Max was having his moments, I got this sense of like Ilia Topuria as this predator who was making reads all while taking a lump here or there, dishing his own back. But like you could just feel that there was a big thing coming at all times. And that sense of anticipation isn't just for us, the audience. Imagine being the person on the other side, staring back at him. You know that that plays into every single one of his opponent's minds, and it affects how they operate. The choices that they make, the weapons that they choose to use. So I think it's easy to say the threat of his power, blah 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 blah, but really it is the threat of his power, along with all of the other tremendous skill set that he has, that not just makes him so offensively capable, but it forces the opponent to have to think about everything at once, not just this, that, and the other. Everything. You have to think about everything at once, and that's really hard to do for anybody.
And to your point, Max fought well, and he started very well, especially. And
Yeah.
I always think the mark of a great fighter is one who can adjust to a really good game plan for the opponent, and that's exactly what he did. Like, Max was throwing that front kick up through the middle throughout the first round. You hardly saw it in the second round, and that's not because Max didn't want to throw it. That's because Aaliyah adjusted and moved inside and hit him with those big shots inside. And then, as you said, the well-roundedness is not enough to describe someone like him. But you often think about a fight like that. One guy starts to overwhelm another guy with striking. Okay, maybe you can take him down. But it was actually the other way around. Aaliyah took Max down.
Yes.
So, like, the thread of the wrestling wasn't even there as well, because we knew who was going to win that. It was just... it was such a totally brilliant display from Topuria. It's amazing. Look, we'll talk another time maybe about what's next. I want to touch on Chimaev, because I feel like he's another guy, and it may be a little bit easier to understand, because I was even explaining, I was watching the fights with my fiance, because I was on a little bit earlier. She watched some of the fights during the pandemic, hasn't watched hardly one since, but anyway, but she liked Chimaev because of that. And I was kind of telling her, like, this guy Robert Whittaker, he fought an Olympic wrestler, and he went 10 rounds with him, and he never took him down, so this is going to be tough. And we're 20 seconds into the fight, and Chimaev has taken him down. That in itself, how crazy is that? And, like, Chimaev's, his ability just to dominate people, it's insane, isn't it?
He's next level, and I'll admit to the fact that I think at times have allowed um his not being very reliable to outside of the octagon to affect how I rate him in certain situations.
Yes.
Of course, I think very, very highly of him. It's not like I was like, oh, this guy's a bum. That never crossed my mind. But in terms of like expectations, can I rely on him to deliver what I think he's capable of when he's operating at the highest level? My brain goes, I don't know. And so whenever I have that, I don't know, I tend to start backing off bold predictions about guys, even though I want to have that bold prediction. I'm not very good at having those hot takes. It's just not how my brain works, because I'm such a devil's advocate. Like, I can make a case for either side in almost every single scenario. So I wasn't like boldly claiming, oh yeah, Khamzat's going to go out there and run through Robert Whittaker. In fact, I thought that fight was going to look a lot different than it did. I thought Robert was going to be able to, I thought he would get taken down, but I thought his defense on the ground, his get up ability, and overall over a longer period of time, eventually that takedown defense, he would be able to stop the initial shot. Maybe if the fight had gone longer, because remember that was going to be a 5-round fight. And I thought, okay, that's really going to favor Robert. He just needs to be smart the first few rounds. Khamzat has shown himself to be a little bit less dangerous as the fight goes on. And that was where my analyst mind was. Man, was I just don't think I fully wrapped my mind around how, I'm trying to think of the best word, and not just a word that gets overused, but just, and dangerous comes to mind, but it is such an overused word. How next level his wrestling is. The way that, how tall is he? 6'3", 6'2"?
Yeah, I think so. He's a tall guy, right? And
He's a
obviously
tall guy.
coming up from welterweight as well. I know Robert fought at welterweight, but he just was so much bigger than him, a former champion.
He's massive. And the fact that a guy who's 6'3" can level change so low and penetrate and find the knees, sometimes the ankles, and on anyone. I mean, it's like he shoots from across the entire octagon, and normally we'd be like, oh, that's a bad shot because it's way too far out. For him, it doesn't matter. And I think that the physicality of the initial shot is unlike anybody else. There are guys who chain, and he does chain, but there are a lot of guys who the first shot, it's almost like a throwaway. They're just trying to close distance and get some sort of hand on you. With him, like, you're cooked. And then clearly the squeeze. I mean, I know Robert had that a pre-existing injury, but still, like, if you are capable of cross-facing someone and damaging their mandible, that is quite the squeeze.
It was, I'm used to watching fights at like 5 o'clock in the morning and I'm half asleep watching them. But when that happens at like 7 o'clock in the day, it hit different. It was like, oh my God, this guy's just after squeezing his face into oblivion here. It was absolutely insane. And, the title, obviously, next Sean Strickland, I think a lot of people are like, sorry, Sean, just move aside there a little bit. And I know it's tough on him, but
I hated saying it. I did an interview with Submission Radio, and I feel all of it. They used that as the headline, and I was like, I can't even share this because like Sean and I are super cool, but it's my job to tell the truth about what I think about a situation. And the fact is, what he went out there and did, I feel like really stole the show. And that's the problem. It's not Sean's fault. It's just, it is what it is. When you go out there and do everything that's asked of you and more in terms of like making a statement's been made. And it's obviously up to the UFC at this point. Either way, it'll be a good fight. But I do think Sean's got a little bit of a reason to be nervous about his timeline now.
I think the thing with Chimaev as well, it feels like it's overdue because when he was beating up guys on the come up, we were like, oh, give him the title shot now. And then he beat Burns, and we're like, okay, title shot now. Then he beat Usman, and we're like, give him the title shot. It feels like it is well overdue, and look, hopefully that will happen. Let's move on because we could stay here for 2 hours probably chatting about UFC 308. I would ask you about judging because obviously we've talked an awful lot about judging, and we're always two of the people on those judging calls every 6 weeks or however much they are. And you've done phenomenal work obviously on your channel, but on the commentary as well. Speaking about judging, how tough was it to kind of, I feel like when you get into judging and you take it seriously, you almost have to put everything else to a side, clear your brain, and then look at the rule set and speak to people like Big John and others, and get a new idea of how the sport works almost from that point of view. How tough was that? As someone who's fought, as someone who's done the commentary and done analysis and everything like that, for you to step into that?
It blew my mind when I finally because I dipped my toe in the water taking Mark Goddard's online course. And then I could be getting the order of these things wrong. So I took his entire course, but I'm someone who like, until I really, really know it, I want to keep digging into it. And so then I went on, and I think I had like a 3-hour long one-on-one call with John McCarthy. And I thought better, who better to go to than the guy who was, part of the team that wrote the initial rule set. And then I've spoken to a bunch of judges, and then I finally took the course. And I actually flew, because I wasn't able to make it to the conference. I actually flew Kevin McDonald to Kansas City and had him stay here for a couple days, and we just spent hours together. And he put me through the whole coursework that I would have done had I been able to go to the conference. All that being said, my mind was blown because I started training MMA in 2006. So, and I fought, and not only did I fight, but like I was around fighters. I've been in many rules meetings. I've been in the one-on-one meeting with the ref when you're getting your hands taped and they talk to you about your particular match. I've been in countless, situations like that in the UFC. So I'm not new to this. And yet I was like, what? You're judging what? And it was wild to me. I remember after I got certified, I just couldn't shut up about it. And like I was telling everyone I knew, in particular coaches, hey, did you know that, they don't even really score takedowns? Like it's just a change of position. And unless you do something with it, or unless it has amplitude and altitude and like it kind of doesn't really help you unless it's a means to an end. And it was funny because different coaches had different reactions, but a lot of them were like, yeah. I've been in this game however long, I know how this works. And they all, not all, many of them default, and this is even more true of fighters. Many of them default to, judging just sucks. You have no idea what's going to happen. So why even think about it? And that's where I'm like, yes, there is bad judging, but by and large, like the vast majority of judging is just misunderstood.
How did you get over that initial reaction? Because like I'm the same. Like obviously I try to people would accuse me of trying to stick it down people's throats, not talking about judging in an awful lot. And I've maybe kind of taken that back a little bit because I don't want to annoy people too much. But it is one of those things that it feels like, you know, when you find MMA for the first time, you feel like and maybe not so much these days, but when we started watching MMA or competing MMA, it's like you found something really cool that a lot of people don't know about. And I feel like the judging side of it is almost like that. I'm like, hold on, there's secrets here behind, but yeah, it's extremely nerdy. Has that reaction changed, right? Because I feel like it has a little bit. I feel like people are more open to it now.
Yeah, no, I think I feel a shift even in the few years that I've been neck deep in it. And I'm kind of a little bit of a Johnny come lately as well. I know I definitely see a bit of a shift. And it's funny because I noticed the fighters that and the coaches and the teams that have really decided to investigate and understand the perspective of judges, and those that are still old school and like, oh, they suck anyway. They don't know what they're talking about. They've never done martial arts. I just got to go out there and try to finish the fight and do my thing. You can tell who sits in what camp, and a lot of times you can tell in between rounds because you'll hear coaches say, close round, but she may have gotten, she hit you pretty hard with that last shot. That would be a lot of damage. So now we got to go. They'll start to articulate it more to their fighter in between rounds. It's so important what you tell your fighter in between rounds. And if you think on the flip side of that, even recently, I remember hearing a corner be like, "Yeah, we got that takedown late. I think we're good." And I was like, "Oh no, probably not." You'd think that it doesn't it kind of just if you pull back, doesn't it kind of blow your mind
Massively.
to coach a sport that you don't know the rules to? That's wild. I'm
I've
not saying that the and not the rules, but the judging applies to the rules as well. Like I'm not saying that the way that fights are judged is perfect. It's not ideal in my mind. I wish there were things about the judging criteria that were different. But that doesn't matter. It is the way that it is. And so we have to operate within the confines of the way that it is and the way that people are taught to judge fights. So even if I don't like it, it doesn't matter. It is what it is.
I think a lot of people want changes as well and don't actually understand what we have now. So how do you know you want to change when you don't understand, how it is now? But I often find, you hear top coaches or top fighters talking about judging. And, maybe I would say something like, what would you know? How are you going to know more than the world champion? I'm like, well, if Tom Brady said a touchdown was worth 12 points, would that make it right? It wouldn't.
I know.
It'd still be wrong. And it's just the way it is. But just to
that's the whole reason. That's the whole reason I actually went to the trouble of getting the piece of paper, because I knew that the minute that I started correcting fighters or other commentators or whatever the case may be, it would immediately be like, what does this chick know? That's why I had to have I'll show you my piece of paper. I'm a judge now. So yes, I do know about judging.
and sitting through those judging calls, everyone should have the right to talk about it all the time anyway. Because
Sean and I are quite often texting
yes.
each other during the calls.
There's some heated WhatsApps going around when those calls go. I just one or two more things I really appreciate it. I want to ask you about your level of preparation, because the first time we spoke, obviously we spoke an awful lot about judging, but you kind of told me this was a preparation for your commentary as much as anything else. Obviously you wanted to understand the sport and everything like that, but I love when I see, and you see it maybe more in other sports, but you see someone puts a list of the players playing, whether it's NFL or soccer or whatever it might be, and they have 10 different points, and one is in red biro and one is in blue and one is in black and things like that. Can you explain to us what your preparation, UFC 293, obviously you were the first one to ever commentate on a pay-per-view, and congratulations on that, and you did a fantastic job, and you always do a fantastic job, but the level of preparation that you put in, let's say it's a Monday morning, you're preparing for the fights on a Saturday, can you just explain to us maybe your process and what you actually do to prepare?
Well, if it's Monday, I'd be freaking out because I start way before 5 days out. But yeah, I mean, I go above and beyond and probably a little bit overboard because I recognize the difference in my my paper credentials, right? Like I don't have a belt on the wall to point to, and I don't even have a UFC fight to point to, although potentially an atomweight division coming. I'm too old at this point, but anyway,
Let's
that's
do
a
it.
whole other
Let's do
topic for another day.
it.
Um, so yeah, I kind of overcompensate, I think, by doing just a ridiculous amount of study. I could show you. I wish I had one printed out because literally I make the margins on my paper less than a quarter of an inch, and it is literally filled. It's in boxes that I understand how to get to the information I need to quickly. But yeah, basically, I watch as much film on every single fighter as possible. I watch. Uh, if not every interview they do, as many interviews as possible, which during a pay-per-view week can get pretty overwhelming.
Yeah.
It could be a lot. I did the math going into UFC 293, and I ended up spending about 3 hours per fighter. So 3 times 28, whatever that is. It's a lot.
A lot. Yeah, that is a lot. How
Yeah.
about in terms of the amount of fights you watch? Because like I try to prepare. I don't necessarily prepare a 30th of the amount you prepare, but watching fights, what way do you do it? Because like if there's someone brand new I've never seen before, it's very different. I try to watch full fights and go back. But if someone like, let's say if it's Max Holloway, I try to get maybe a reminder of a similar opponent to who he's fighting, or something like that. What way do you do it when you're preparing for a specific
Yeah,
fighter?
you can be a little bit, yeah, exactly. When it's a fighter that your brain is very familiar with, obviously I don't rewatch every single one of Max Holloway's fights. That would take forever. But certainly I will rewatch the most recent three at a minimum. Mostly, if not the whole fight, then I will at least get an understanding of I want to be reminded of the story of the whole fight. And Max does have a lot of decisions. So he's a good example of that. Because sometimes it really does have to do with the adjustments, like what you said earlier. I want to look at the adjustments that he made. So in order to understand that, I do need to watch most of the first round, and then also see how the second round was different from the first, and how the third was. You end up. I don't take too many shortcuts, I guess is my point. I will sometimes watch them on double speed
That is
to
so handy. It's a great way of watching them because you do get a
yeah.
feel for what's actually happening, don't you?
Yeah, if I'm in a hurry, I'll watch them on double speed, and then I'll, like, slow down the section that I really want to hone in on. Oh my gosh, I could geek out though, like particularly when I do breakdowns for ESPN, they want to get really in the weeds. And so when I can do super slow-mo on certain sequences, man, you start to really appreciate just the really granular detail of certain fighters, what their foot does, where their shoulders are, like even the grappling. I remember I did one on Islam Makhachev. I mean, the way that he was using ankle hooks and like attacking all these different things at the same time, and at the end of the day, it ends up being a rear naked choke, but like there's just so much more to appreciate. So if I have time to like watch particularly finishing sequences in super slow-mo, I like that.
I feel the love for the sport coming back here a little bit. Listen, yeah, but it's real. Laura, last two things, and I'll
Yeah.
maybe we'll run through them quickly, right? Okay, Amanda Nunes, Juliana Pena, Raquel Pennington, Kayla Harrison. How does it work out? Let's say we have a year. How does it work out? What do you think is going to happen? I'm not. Maybe you can give me a prediction. I don't know if you want to throw out a prediction or not. Obviously, being in your position, but I'm really fascinated because I feel I threw Pennington in there as well because a lot of people think she won that fight, and it was a close fight, and I feel like she deserves to have her name in there with those other three as well. I think the level of intrigue around that with possibly Nunes coming back, Harrison maybe not setting the world alight yet, but we know how good she is. I'm just fascinated by that picture at the moment. How do you think it's going to play itself out over the next while?
I mean, let me give you an idea of what I think it may be a bit of a stretch, but what I think like a really perfect scenario would be if Juliana fought Kayla. And I'm not writing the future here, but say Kayla does get past Juliana and Kayla is the champion. Um, Again, I'm not saying that this is realistic. It's not. I wish Kayla could fight Amanda at 145.
Yes. Oh,
That's what I
145. Oh.
145. Why they would
Interesting.
do that? No, they wouldn't, because there is no 145 weight class
Did that
anymore.
did that belt ever go away? I feel like is Amanda Nunes still the 145-pound champion? I feel like
There
she
you
might
go.
be.
See, you're helping me make a case here, right?
Two-way champion, you know?
My point with all that is I miss watching Kayla fight at a higher weight class. I really do believe that bantamweight diminishes her. Big time.
That's a great point. That is a great point. Right. Last thing. Right. Last question. We've talked a lot about John Jones over the last while. We've talked about Francis Ngannou. We've talked about Tom Aspinall. I want to shout out Stipe Miocic.
Yeah.
Because this guy, I feel like people are acting like, oh, he's a nobody. He shouldn't be fighting John Jones. Stipe Miocic is the greatest heavyweight of all time, and I feel like he doesn't get enough shine. You know, obviously, you've been a fan of the sport for a long time. Tell us about Stipe and why people. We're moving away from 308 and going to 309
Yeah.
now. But Stipe deserves a lot of respect, and he's not getting it, is he?
He's not. He's not. And I don't think he necessarily cares, but
Definitely not. No, he doesn't care. No, no,
he doesn't care.
no.
He doesn't care. So I think that's part of the reason why we continue to put shine on, all the other shiny objects in front of us. No, I think man, you got to go back and watch his fights with DC, I think, to really appreciate the greatness of Stipe. Not only the boxing, not only the clinch work, the wrestling. He just has this like nothing's overly fancy, but it's fundamental, it's hard, it's rough. It's like he's got this blue collarness to him outside of the octagon, but it's also a bit of a blue collar approach inside of the octagon too. And again, nothing flashy, nothing shiny, nothing overly sexy, but he is the greatest heavyweight of all time, and people need to use that phrase until we know otherwise. And the fact is we don't know otherwise. And I will say, and I have said many times, as big of a John Jones fan as I am, and I'm a John Jones is the GOAT person, that's my GOAT. Um, we don't really know what we're getting from John at heavyweight. We had one
100%.
example of a very short fight in which most of it took place with him in a dominant wrestling position. John Jones is a heavyweight striker. We have no idea what he's going to look like and what he's going to do and how he's going to operate. Like, no clue.
And I don't think John does either, because like
No.
the shape John is in now versus the shape he was in versus Cyril Gane is very different. He looks like in a way different, body shape. And I wonder, is that an adjustment based on not necessarily what happened in that fight, but what happened maybe around that fight or the preparation coming into it that he.
Yes.
So it's very interesting. Stipe, like we talked about for years with Cain Velasquez and Brock Lesnar, the perfect size for a heavyweight. And I don't think there's any doubt about it. Stipe Miocic is the perfect size for heavyweight. He won the game in that. Whereas John Jones, I think he's trying to find his perfect size to become a heavyweight. And as you said, what was that fight? 90 seconds or only around that? So there isn't much tape there. We saw what happened, as you said, DC with Stipe, he's well able to take on some of the best coming up as well. I'm really intrigued by that fight. And I have great respect for Francis and Tom Aspinall and all the rest of them, but I think you're not a proper MMA fan if you don't have proper respect for Stipe Miocic, and he definitely deserves that. So shout out there.
Agree.
And also, you talked about the atomweight division and the women's division. I have to give a shout out Danny McCormick. Danny McCormick, the Invicta champion from Ireland. We're trying to get her signed to the UFC. Laura, put in a good word for us. Danny McCormick needs to be signed. 2-time Invicta champion, unbeaten in her last 4. So.
Listen, I'm telling you, I know I've had this conversation with Mick so many times, but the fact that Dana said it out loud, it was the first time I've ever heard Dana talk about it. Now, it wasn't like we're going to do this or we're planning on this or this is the thing that's really in the works. It was just kind of a thought he put out there. But here's my pitch, okay? I know that it's not the deepest division. It is definitely deeper than featherweight ever was, though. I will say that. And it's kind of this field of dreams effect, right? If you build it, they will come. The problem
100%.
with not having one is that there's nothing for people like myself at one point, not now, but 8 years ago, to strive toward. I would have stayed in MMA had there been something to work toward, but there really wasn't. And so when you're a young woman and you're 25, and I love Invicta, but if Invicta is the top of the mountain for you, and that is where your earnings will be capped, and you're choosing between that and starting a family and going off in a completely different direction with your career, you're going to choose family and career because that's the choice that makes sense. So until there is a goal, until there is a place, until there is a field of dreams, we're not going to see the atomweight division get any bigger, because why would they?
Let's do it. Even like when there was talks about the 125-pound men's division going away, I know there's a fighter here and he won Irish MMA Fighter of the Year. Like, you think about all the good Irish MMA fighters, and he's retired because at that time he was like, oh well, I don't have the UFC anymore. What am I going to do? And it kind of it all went there. And I think it might be the same for the women at 105 pounds. So I'm definitely all for it, and hopefully in the next year or two we see it. But
yeah, I completely agree. That would be an awesome day. I hope I get to call those fights if they open a atom weight class for sure.
It'll be fantastic. Laura, thank you very much for your time. This is supposed to be a 30-minute show. It's now a 40-minute show.
That's right. I love it, Sean. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you to everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.